6, 1989. Thank you.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians once again are struck by an increase in interest rates imposed by the Bank of Canada, but caused by inflationist deficits from this government. Even the governor for the Bank of Canada stated that deficits increase inflation and therefore interest rates. For a family that bought an average house with an average mortgage, that represents $10,000 more every year in interest rates. The more the government spends, the more Canadians pay. When will the government finally stop spending so that the Canadians can save some more money? Mr. Speaker, the Bank of Canada is an independent arm's-length institution. Canadians are living through difficult times. Investments we have made for Canadians has caused inflation, some people say. Stephen Poloz, former governor, stated that our investments actually stopped deflation. This leader of the opposition has the opportunity to support Canadians over the next hour by approving C-32 in order to help people through the full economic statement.
Well, Canadians were hit with another interest rate uppercut today. After inflationary deficits by this Liberal government are driving up inflation and interest rates. The governor of the Bank of Canada has even said these deficits are driving the higher costs. One mother told the CBC that she signed in to a 1.9% mortgage, variable rate, because she believed the government that rates would be low for long. And now she says, I punched myself on that decision. Why did I listen to these people? Mr. Speaker, how is this mother going to pay the extra $1,000 a month in mortgage payments that they're putting on her back?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be careful if I were the member opposite asking people who's listening to whose advice when his idea to hedge on inflation was to go buy crypto. Shame on that advice. Irresponsible, not appropriate. Mr. Speaker, we are going to eliminate interest on student loans and apprentice loans. We're going to make it more affordable to buy a house. We're going to get workers the money they need faster, Mr. Speaker. In 1 hour, the Conservative chorus can sing with us and support Canadians, or they can do what they've always done and voted against.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah, we're singing from a very different song sheet than this inflationary government, Mr. Speaker. But you know who else is singing from a different song sheet? The Liberal MP for the Yukon. He's confirmed what Conservatives have been saying all along. He says, I'm not happy with this gun bill, and I'm not in a position to support this bill at this moment with those amendments in play. This is really upsetting. Many Yukoners regularly hunt, either as a source of food or for recreational aspects of hunting. Mr. Speaker, even their own backbench are getting the message. Canadians don't want to ban hunters, they want to stop criminals. Will the government get the message?
Here. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, and we are doing precisely that, including some of the provisions within the project of law C-21, which will give additional tools to police, including raising maximum sentences to go after hardened gun traffickers, including $450 million to bolster the resources for CBSA to allow them to build on the record number of illegal gun seizures. Those were provisions that the Conservatives either voted against or filibustered. And if the Conservatives were serious about protecting our communities from gun violence, then they would reverse their position, support these measures so we can go after the criminals who've been terrorizing our communities for far too long with guns. Thank you.
Leader of the Opposition.
This Liberal government has granted a contract to a China-linked company to provide technology, anti-spying technology. But the issue is that the owner of this company is criminally accused of 21 different crimes in the United States of America linked to espionage itself. So how can the government possibly make the decision of hiring someone who is criminally accused of espionage in order to stop espionage in our police forces? The Honourable Minister for Public Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are aware of the concerns with regards to the RCMP contract with Sinclair Technologies, and our government is studying this. This company has solid experience in the matter. It provides services based on requirements established by the different departments. We will take all measures necessary to protect our infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, that answer was encrypted with bureaucraties. Maybe that would be a better way to protect our internal communications. But instead, the government came up with a different plan. What they've done is they've given a contract to a company that's supposed to protect the RCMP from eavesdropping, and that company is owned by another company that's charged with 21 espionage offenses in the United States of America. How on God's green earth did this government think it was a good idea to give a company accused of espionage the control of our anti-espionage technology?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we put in place rigorous processes to screen for national security concerns when it comes to awarding contracts, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure my colleague that we are looking very, very carefully at the way in which our independent public servants screen this particular contract. I share the member's concern. I think we can all agree that it's important to protect our national security, which is why we cracked down on foreign funding, Mr. Speaker, which is why we struck 2 independent, nonpartisan panels to confirm the integrity of our democratic institutions, including our elections in 2019-21. What's the distinction? We did these things, the Conservatives did not.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
Well, for the first half. I don't like the way this one's starting, so I'm going to ask you just kind of keep your comments down, please. The
Honourable Member for La Prairie. This is the story of a guy who listens to the radio in his car and hears on the news that a dangerous driver is driving in the opposite direction of traffic and shouts to his radio. There's not just one, there's at least 100, unable to realise that he himself is the dangerous driver. Now that's the story. And now the government of Canada is behaving exactly like him. Quebec, the provinces and now medical associations are asking the federal government to increase health funding. When will the government start driving in the direction of traffic and increase transfers?
House Leader.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is essential to protect our healthcare system, and we are absolutely assured that we will continue to work on the matter. It is essential it's essential for us to protect our healthcare system, and that is the reason for which we continue to invest in our healthcare system. We will continue to do so every single day, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The physicians' associations are asking for an increase in federal health funding, and they haven't received one. This is a classic example, Mr. Speaker. We've been going through this for years. Ottawa says it is cooperating, but it is not true. There is absolutely no cooperation. Everyone knows that Quebec's healthcare system is underfunded by the federal government, but Ottawa is still withholding money. Everyone knows that Ottawa knows absolutely nothing about the healthcare system, but they still want to impose standards. Mr. Speaker, patients don't need pedagogues or teachers, they need caregivers. When will the government finally increase transfers? The Honourable Minister for Mental Health. Mr. Speaker, for a long time we have been working with provinces and territories, not only to provide funding, but also to make sure that there is a national vision for healthcare and systems that meet the needs of Canadians. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, our government has invested more than $72 billion over the pandemic in order to protect the healthcare of Canadians. We will increase Canada Health transfers by 10% in March 2023, on top of the 5% announced recently.
Or Burnaby South.
Bank of Canada announced another interest rate increase today, and it's going to mean a lot of pain for Canadian families. With the increase in interest rates, we know that many families are going to see an increase in their mortgage payments of over $1,000. $1,000 is not something that most Canadian families can afford to pay in addition to their budgets that they're dealing with right now. So far, the approach to the inflation has been to put more and more pressure on the backs of Canadians. So when will this Prime Minister find a way to tackle the inflation that doesn't create pain for workers, that actually provides them the support and respect they need?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party knows, the Bank of Canada is an independent institution that has been tasked since December of last year to get inflation back down to 2%. Mr. Speaker, the bank is doing their job. We're doing our job, which making sure that we have the fiscal firepower to face what's going to come, but also, Mr. Speaker, to invest in Canadians, to support the Canadians who need it the most. That's why we're helping Canadians to buy a new home. We're advancing the payments for workers' benefits, and we're also making sure that student loan interest gets removed forever. Mr. Speaker, this is the right thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do. It's why we hope that all parties vote with us on C-32 today.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Bank of Canada should not be to create more pain for Canadians, and this government should find a way to reduce that pain and step up for them. Le debt consommateur.
Consumer debt has increased by 8% this year compared to last year. These are difficult times, and the fact that consumer debts are this high, this is because of interest rates, but also because of cost of living that is increasing. Once again, the pressure is on the shoulders of workers. When will this government finally tackle inflation in a way that puts less pressure on the shoulders of workers? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we greatly respect the work of workers throughout the country in their aim to build a more prosperous Canada. Canadians are living difficult times in this global inflation crisis. That is the reason for which the Bank of Canada is arm's length and independent. They aim to reduce inflation to 2%. We want to make sure that Canadians have money in their pockets when they need it. That is the reason for which it is essential that every member in this House today votes for supports for Canadians and support us in voting for C-32.
Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, the wasteful spending of this Liberal government knows no bounds. Yesterday, we found out that the Liberals paid out billions of dollars, billions in COVID payments to people who were ineligible. Rather than accepting their mistake, they imply that the Auditor General cannot be trusted. But it's Liberal waste that is causing the cost of living crisis in this country. When will this Prime Minister take the responsibility, stop the inflationary spending so Canadians can put food on their tables and heat their homes?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Employment.
We are very proud that the Auditor General confirmed that the emergency measures reached their goals of getting money into the hands of Canadians quickly, of making sure that Canadians could stay home safely and avoiding significant social and economic crisis. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General also found that it got money to the people who needed it most, low-income workers, the most vulnerable populations, and we won't apologize for that.
There for Kings.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, everybody in this House agrees that COVID supports were necessary. We are talking about wasteful spending. This is about the abject failure of this government to manage COVID supports and ensure that the people who needed it received it. Instead, they sent checks to dead people and to people in prison. This government has wasted and mismanaged billions of dollars. Now Canadians are footing the bill with inflation and are worried about how they are going to survive. When will this Liberal government give Canadians a break?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, everyone in this House also agreed that we needed to get money to Canadians quickly, that we needed to do it through an attestation-based approach, and that we needed to verify eligibility at the back end. That's exactly what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Yesterday, the Auditor General tabled a damning report finding $32 billion, with a B, dollars of waste. The Liberals borrowed and printed cash so they could give CERB checks to prisoners, non-residents, and paid civil servants. The minister tried to cover up her incompetence by then bludgeoning the Auditor General on her integrity. Conservatives believe in hope. With the huge increase today in interest rate hikes, when will the Prime Minister stop hurting Canadians and attacking those who tell the truth about their waste?
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Auditor General and all of her team for the important work with the tabling of the report yesterday. I have a lot of respect for the Auditor General, especially for her independence. As we've already said, we appreciate the fact that she confirmed that our COVID benefits were effective and efficient, and we won't let ourselves be distracted, Mr. Speaker. Canadians gave us a clear mandate, and we'll continue to be here to support them. And I would ask my colleagues from across the way, Mr. Speaker, by the way, to do the right thing and vote for C32 this afternoon.
Honourable Député, the Honourable Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, you don't get to pick and choose out of the report. She found waste in the billions, and this minister then said that she changed her numbers under pressure from the opposition. Yes, she called her integrity into question. It's shameful. Meals on Wheels in my community had to close because of high food costs and rising gas prices. Volunteers can't afford to deliver meals. $32 billion of government waste is an insult to those who've been stretching those dimes into dollars. Why should the Auditor General, seniors, workers, and the vulnerable pay the price for Liberal waste?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Speaker, the difference between us and the Conservatives is that we start from a place of trust with Canadians. We trust that when Canadians need support, that they can access it. We trust Canadians that when they're in a vulnerable position, that they'll have access to the benefits and the supports that they need. Unlike the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, we start from a place of trust. That's how we're operating with the Canada Dental Benefit, the Canada Housing Benefit, childcare, the doubling of the GST tax credit. When there is need, Mr. Speaker, our government is responding, and we're going to keep doing that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we trust the Auditor General, but the Minister for National Revenue, who is involved in the Auditor General's report, is casting doubts on her integrity. She said that the Auditor General was pressured by the opposition. It wasn't her fault if she found wastage from the government. This is what she said yesterday. The obligation to audit COVID benefits was in a statute which gave us a deadline to provide the information to the clerk. So who makes decisions on acts? It's the government, Mr. Speaker. So why is the minister pressuring the Auditor General in this case? Mr. Speaker, our government has made bold and courageous choices, and we've saved people's lives. We've saved the economy by helping Canadians feed themselves and their families under a safe roof. Mr. Speaker, it was that or chop, chop, chop from the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. And I have met organisations in the field, Mr. Speaker, and every single one tells me, well, thank God that the Liberals were in power during the crisis. We will continue to be here to work for all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The only thing that we're going to chop, chop, chop are Liberal taxes. That's what we'll chop, chop, chop. The Minister receives questions. She insults MPs on a Gaspé radio. She hasn't apologised. When the Auditor General, an independent parliamentary officer, criticises her work, she casts doubts on the Auditor General's integrity. Let us not even think about her irresponsible reference to the Second World War yesterday. Once again, I would like the Minister to do the only honourable thing. Rise and apologise. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listen, the only thing that this party across the way is good for is repeating what their leader is saying and just saying triple this, triple that, triple that. Perhaps, instead of just singing off the same hymn sheet, perhaps they should talk about real matters, planetary matters, environment, helping Canadians, helping families, helping seniors, protecting the environment. For that, they would actually have to work, and they're incapable of doing so, Mr. Speaker. I would ask them to vote for C32 at least today. The Honourable MP for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, just over a year ago, the government awarded a contract to Sinclair Technologies, a company partly owned by China, to secure the RCMP's communications and the privacy of the Prime Minister. This contract grants a Chinese government-owned company access to the RCMP's secret frequencies. This is like asking Dr. No to design James Bond's gadgets. It's so ridiculous and so irresponsible that we just can't believe it's true. Will the government cancel this contract immediately? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we have already implemented a very rigorous process to protect ourselves from threats caused by foreign interference, and we are currently closely following the context of this contract. We will continue to make investments. We will continue to grant tools needed to the intelligence and security community to protect all of our institutions, including policing bodies. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, with China's interference in political party financing, spying at Hydro-Quebec, the lab out in Winnipeg, the clandestine police stations, one would have thought that the RCMP would have actually started monitoring Chinese operations in Canada by now. Well, no. Now, it's China that will be monitoring the RCMP's operations. 21 espionage charges in the US against this company, and the government does not even do a security check. The contract could have been given to a Boucherville company, but no. It's given to China instead of given to Quebec. Are they doing this on purpose? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government takes threats to Canada from interference very seriously. The RCMP has already acted with an update on a number of threats caused by foreign interference. But on this side of the House, we will continue to offer all the tools necessary for public safety, all tools necessary for intelligence bodies in order to protect all of our democratic institutions. Thank you very much.
Thornhill.
It hasn't even been 2 weeks since the government announced its about-face on China in their Indo-Pacific strategy that we learned that the Liberals awarded a contract for RCMP communications equipment to a company with ties to the government in Beijing. Sinclair Technologies was awarded the contract for a system meant to protect the RCMP's land-based communications from eavesdropping. Here's the problem. Sinclair Technologies' parent company is owned in part by the Chinese government, and it's charged with 21 espionage offenses. There is nothing to review. Will they terminate this contract today? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we are aware of the concerns surrounding the RCMP's contract with Sinclair Technologies, and our government is looking into them and examining all potential options. We do take all measures to ensure the integrity of our infrastructure very, very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Here's an option. Terminate it. They admitted that they didn't take security concerns or Sinclair's ownership into consideration during the bidding process. Worse yet, Sinclair's main competitor for the RCMP contract was a Quebec-based firm called Comprod. They chose made in China instead of made in Canada, and the difference between St. Clair and Comprod was less than $60,000. The U.S. blacklisted St. Clair's parent company last year, and Canada just gave them a contract. So did they really just sell national security for 60 grand?
Wow. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as we've said on a number of occasions, we're obviously looking extremely carefully at the details of how this contract was awarded, but I assure my colleague
The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, as I was in the course of explaining to colleagues in this chamber, of course, we're extremely concerned with the revelations around this contract, which is why we're reviewing it very carefully. And obviously, we put in place very rigorous protocols to guard against any threats to national security. Those are protocols that this government continues to reinforce with additional supports for law enforcement, additional supports for national security, additional supports to make sure that we're protecting all of our democratic institutions, including the critical infrastructure that supports our police. Thank you.
Before going on, I just want to remind the honourable members, when they shout out something and it's very clear to the Speaker that it's not parliamentary, and I won't call anyone out, but I just want to put it out there that the next time I hear something like that, I'm going to have to call the person out, and nobody wants to be embarrassed in front of their peers and their constituents who put them here. Hopefully, they'll be proud of their members who are here because they're being civil to each other.
The honourable member for Charles-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, in what kind of country does the Prime Minister allow the Chinese Communist regime access to its most secret files? The answer? In Canada, of course. 2 years ago, this Prime Minister awarded a contract to a company with close ties to the Chinese government for machines in our embassy. Luckily, that was stopped. And today, we've learned that this very same Prime Minister has awarded another contract for electric components that with ties to the Chinese Communist regime for RCMP communications systems, where security has to be ironclad. Why did the Prime Minister open the doors to the Chinese Communist regime? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker. Same question, same answer. We have independent public servants who will be examining this contract in particular. That has to do with the RCMP. What is more important is that all MPs in this House understand that we have made investments to grant tools necessary for public safety for our democratic institutions. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Charles-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we have a major problem here in Canada. 2 years ago, the NARTEC file was closed. Recommendations stated that all purchases had to be stopped with companies that had direct links to the CCP. So why are we here today with a new contract with the Chinese Communist regime, especially with regards to such important communication infrastructure for the RCMP? Does this government actually make decisions, or does everyone just do what they want?
Mr. Speaker, and of course, as my colleague have said, and I've said as well, we're taking these concerns extremely seriously. We're looking at all options, we're reviewing processes, and our concerns are with you on this particular issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Griesbach.
The Alberta Children's Hospital is operating at over 120%, Mr. Speaker. Children's hospital staff are being overwhelmed. And as emergency rooms fill up, families are forced to wait outside in trailers to get the care they need. Imagine that, Mr. Speaker. This government points fingers at everyone else and letting Premier Smith do whatever she wants to our public healthcare system. Canadians are fed up being told that it's someone else's problem. When will this government do its job and uphold the Canada Health Act?
The Honourable Minister of Health, or Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada Health Act is one of the most important emblems of our country and the access to publicly funded quality health care. It is extraordinarily important that we all do our part to help all of the pediatric institutions by doing what has been asked by public health: washing our hands, keep a distance, wear a mask when you're in crowded indoor spaces, and for us to be able to work with provinces and territories on the health human resources crisis and on the adequate funding as we go forward.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Well, that answer was not enough from this minister. There is an influx of sick kids in Ontario, and parents are panicked. Canada's healthcare system is in a state of crisis this Prime Minister can't ignore any longer. CHEO is calling in the Red Cross to help. Kingston Health Sciences is taking kids from Hamilton and London as their children's hospitals are overrun and understaffed. Conservative premiers are gutting healthcare, and this government is allowing it to happen. What will it take for this government to finally sit down with the provinces and provide the funding needed so sick kids can get the care they need?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are worried, as are the parents of kids across this country, and our hearts are with them, but we all have to do everything we can do to keep people well and to observe the public health measures by the public health authorities. Our government has a long track record of working with provinces and territories not only to provide the funding, but to ensure the national vision for health care that delivers for Canadians. Our government has made significant investments to support health systems, $72 billion over the course of the pandemic. We will increase the Canada Health Transfer by 10% in March, as we increased it by 5% earlier.
The honourable member for Whitby.
Mr. Speaker, we know that persons with disabilities are disproportionately underrepresented in the labour force and face a range of physical, attitudinal, and institutional barriers that prevent access to the workforce. That's why our government is taking action to increase accessibility and inclusion in Canadian businesses and workplaces. Yesterday, the Honourable Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion announced the creation of a Disability Inclusion Business Council. Can the Minister please share with this House more information about the Council?
The Honourable Minister for Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, the member for Whitby, for this important question. The creation of the Disability Inclusion Business Council marks a significant step towards prioritizing accessibility and disability inclusion in the workplace. The Council is comprised of business leaders from across Canada who are dedicated to promoting disability inclusion in their workplaces. Through this joint effort, Mr. Speaker, we're working to ensure that Canadians with disabilities can fully participate in the workforce and we can benefit from their innovation and creativity and hard work.
Honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives have been saying for weeks that the Liberal government is going after the tools used by hunters and farmers with Bill C-21, but the Liberals called it fear-mongering, misinformation. It's not a hunting rifle ban, they say. But the Liberal MP for Yukon has publicly said that he will vote against Bill C-21. He agrees with Conservatives on this, Mr. Speaker. And I know there are many, many more rural and northern Liberal MPs who agree with us as well. So who's spreading misinformation? Is it the Prime Minister or his rural MPs, Mr. Speaker? Who's lying?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the answer is the Conservatives are. And the reason is that we've been consistent all along that we are not targeting law-abiding gun owners. We are not targeting those guns which are commonly used for hunting. Rather, we are targeting those guns which have been used in some of the worst mass shootings in this country's history, including Polytechnique, where yesterday, me, the Prime Minister, a number of other colleagues were able to grieve and stand in solidarity with those victims from Poly. And I think we need to be united behind the cause of doing better in honor of the legacy of those victims, and that's precisely what Bill C-21 would do. It's high time for the Conservatives to reverse their position and support that bill. Thank you.
Member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, the amendments to Bill C-21 have caused great concern in Newfoundland and Labrador. Many in my province are avid hunters, either for sport or to put food on the table. This past year, 28,000 of the nearly 70,000 law-abiding gun owners hunted moose back home. So I'd like to know if the Liberal MPs from Newfoundland and Labrador will take the same stand as the Liberal MP from the Yukon. Yes or no?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my colleague and many of us that our government will fully support respectful, law-abiding hunters, those that hunt traditionally, as they do in my province of Newfoundland and Labrador, Indigenous hunters, sports hunters, and target shooters as well, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, yesterday we all stood in this House and recognized the École Polytechnique, a tragedy that happened 33 years ago. We all need to work together to make sure assault-style weapons stay out of our country, and that's what we are going to do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, when I asked the Liberal firearms expert Murray Smith at committee if hunting rifles would be banned as a result of Bill C-21, he answered, yes. Since then, we have heard from thousands of law-abiding firearms owners and hunters across Canada. They are rightfully angry at this Prime Minister for giving them misinformation about his Liberal plan to ban hunting rifles and shotguns. But my question today, Mr. Speaker, isn't to the Prime Minister. It's to all the rural Liberal MPs across the way. Will they stand up for their law-abiding firearms owners and hunters today, or bow to this out-of-control Prime Minister?
L'honorable ministre des Sports.
Je suis une fière députée d'un comté rural.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a proud representative of a beautiful riding with many hunters who enjoy practicing this sport. And this government does not intend to prevent hunters or Indigenous people from practicing this as a sport or a tradition. We will collaborate with all members in this House to ensure that the bill reaches its goal, eliminating handguns, and assault weapons that caused massacres like those at the Mosque of Quebec City and the Polytechnique massacre. The honourable member for Beauce. Well, I hope I'll get an answer to my question, Mr. Speaker. But once again, this government showed that it has its priorities all wrong with Bill C-21 and the amendment to it. Hunters and farmers in my riding are very concerned about their capacity to put food on the table and especially protect their cattle from predators and other threats. When will the government stop targeting law-abiding weapons owners and finally do something about weapons traffickers?
Le ministre national.
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, what I can say is that in hunting season in Gaspésie, there are a lot of people out in the woods. Hunters hunt for moose and deer. They're not out there to wage war on deer and moose. Their goal, my father was a butcher, and the goal is to produce meat. So I hope our colleagues will support this bill. The honourable member for Drummond.
I'd like to invite the honourable members to look to their whips and maybe listen to them. L'honorable député de Drummond.
The honourable member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, 2023 is the 100th birthday of Jean-Paul Riopel, one of the greatest Quebec artists with remarkable importance in our history. But according to the National Art Gallery, he's an old white male artist. And according to La Presse, the director of the museum did everything she could to prevent there from being an exhibition in his honor. Can the minister tell us when his government decided to exclude art from the mission of the National Art Gallery? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think my colleague, who I'm very fond of, is a bit off base here. Of course, we are going to celebrate Riopel. He is a giant, one of the greatest artists that has ever appeared among us, both here in Canada and in France and elsewhere in the world. The government has been there to celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth, and we will continue to be there to celebrate that incredible artist. The honourable member for Drummond. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to hear that. So perhaps the minister is going to do something to end this nonsense. Because if he doesn't do anything about the National Arts Gallery debacle, well, it means either he approves or the gallery is obeying his directions. Because ultimately, the museum is making this into a tool of ideological propaganda rather than making the museum a place to preserve art. And it's like that everywhere right now. We're seeing it everywhere. The National Film Board, the Arts Council, the CRTC is becoming a censor, as we saw earlier this year. So when will this minister stop being a minister of propaganda and instead be a true minister of Canadian heritage? The Honourable Minister of Heritage.
Minister of Propaganda.
Well, Minister of Propaganda, I'm wounded, Mr. Speaker. These are strong words from my colleague. And I would like to assure him that we will be there to celebrate Jean-Paul Riopel, who, as I said before, is a giant standing among our artists. I have been to various exhibitions of Riopel's works, and I would invite my colleagues to do the same. We will be there to celebrate Jean-Paul Riopel.
Well, member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, Christmas is coming, a time for holiday cheer and warmth. Only the Liberal carbon tax is leaving Canadians out in the cold. Seniors and those on fixed incomes, they're struggling, having to choose between buying groceries or heating their homes. Moms having to choose between putting their kids in dance class or paying the home heating bill. Mr. Speaker, this isn't fair. Will this Liberal government have some compassion for these Canadians and stop with their failed carbon tax on Canadians?
Here. The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
We recognize challenges that seniors are facing, and that's precisely why we have been there for them, delivering for them, whether it was the increase to the guaranteed income supplement. That has helped over 900,000 seniors, Mr. Speaker. That has lifted 45,000 seniors out of poverty, or the fact that we move forward on increasing the old age security by 10% for those 75 and over, Mr. Speaker, or the fact that we doubled the GST credit, Mr. Speaker, or providing dental and rental support. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're going to continue to deliver for seniors and all Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answer just proves that the Liberals are completely out of touch with reality. The reality is the vast majority of Canadians won't see a cent from those programs that they've announced. We're talking about the basic necessities of life. Poor Liberal policy and reckless inflationary spending is going to cost Canadians an extra $1,000 on their groceries next year. That's an over 10% increase on food prices. A family of four is going to be paying more than $16,000 next year on groceries alone. So will this government give Canadians a break and axe the carbon tax?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And all of us on all sides of the House are concerned about the affordability challenges of Canadian families, except on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we're actually doing something about it. The Conservatives can redeem themselves in just a few short minutes, Mr. Speaker, by voting for Bill C-32. And, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member will know, as the price on pollution increases, so does the climate rebate. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the honourable leader of the opposition doesn't support that. He supports investing in cryptocurrency. Canadians are losing their shirt, Mr. Speaker, and that's very unfortunate.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what the Liberals are doing. They're forcing Canadians to the food bank. According to the food price report, by 2030, a 5,000-acre farm will pay more than $150,000 in carbon taxes. Wow. Let me be clear. That will destroy the economic viability of the family farm. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois already said we are losing family farms because of the carbon tax. Right. This is putting our food security at risk. Will the Prime Minister cancel his carbon tax on food production, or is the Liberal goal simply to bankrupt Canadian farmers and force Canadians to the food bank?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I'd remind the honourable member that climate change is putting the family farm at risk. After Hurricane Fiona, I have visited farms in my community that have had silos turned down, have had their crops destroyed, and are continuing to feel the financial pinch just as we head into the Christmas season. Mr. Speaker, I'd further point out that the Conservatives talk a big game when it comes to affordability, but they voted against our measures to put more money in the pockets of seniors, to help with the cost of housing. They opposed the Canada Child Benefit, and their leader hosted a press conference to call the programs we put in place during the pandemic big fat government programs that Conservatives wouldn't support. We're going to continue to be there for families. I hope Conservatives will finally put their money where their mouth is and join us.
The Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, with the increase in the cost of living, students and new graduates are having trouble making ends meet. They represent the future of this country. We need to support them. They have expressed their concerns about the increase in the cost of living. Can the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance tell this House what the government is doing to help students and new graduates? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle for her question and hard work. With the increase in the cost of living, our government has quickly taken action to support Canadians who need it most. We will continue to offer these supports, as we did in our fall economic statement and in Bill C-32, including eliminating interest on student loans. That will help students, that will help new graduates. We will ensure that Canadians continue to have money in their pockets. The Conservatives can support us in that in an hour by supporting Bill C-32.
Member for Cumberland Colchester.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's $2 billion worth of waste with respect to vaccines. This Liberal government would want you to believe that tracking these vaccines and their expiration dates is extremely difficult because it's not been done before. In reality, Mr. Speaker, quite obviously, thousands of businesses track their inventory every day. Once again, this government of inaction has failed Canadians. They're incapable of managing passports, they're incapable of managing border crossings, and they certainly cannot balance a budget. Will the Liberal Prime Minister stand up and admit that his wasteful government is driving up prices for home heating, gas, and groceries for all Canadians?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the important question, but there's one thing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say. There's nothing more important than protecting the health and safety of Canadians, and that's what we did as a government, Mr. Speaker. When we started in government, the fill and finish capacity at the beginning of the COVID was around 30 million doses. Thanks to the investments we have attracted in this country, Mr. Speaker, now we can produce and fill and finish more than 600 million doses in case anything would happen. We did not choose the pandemic. We won't choose if there's another one, but we choose to be better prepared on behalf of Canadians.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia Headingley.
$52 billion in new inflationary spending, $500 billion in deficits in just 2 years. Yesterday, the Auditor General reported that $32 billion in overpayments and suspicious payments just went out the door. The Governor of the Bank of Canada said that if Liberal spending had been less, inflation would have been lower. And today, interest rates went up by another 0.5%. Unbelievable. This Prime Minister's big spending is now hurting Canadians. Will he stop the spending, stop the waste, and get inflation under control finally?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I would direct my honourable colleague to a Scotiabank report that says very clearly how our investments in the pandemic had no effect on inflation. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the AG's report. Mr. Speaker, we found that the COVID-19 programs achieved their objective to help Canada avoid a more severe contraction of the economy and the social consequences of a significant increase in poverty. The financial supports allowed the economy to rebound and return to its pre-pandemic level. That's the job of a government, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did. They don't like it, but Canadians sure do.
Member for Perth Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, the job of the government is to make sure it's affordable for Canadians to pay for the essentials of life. It's the job of the government to make sure that the price of groceries don't rise by $1,100 next year. It's the job of a government to make sure that you're not forcing Canadians to make that choice between heating their home and eating. And yet yesterday we hear the Auditor General talk about $4.6 billion going out to ineligible recipients. Mr. Speaker, will this Liberal government stop their inflationary spending so that Canadians can afford to put gas in their tanks and food on their tables and heat their homes?
The Honourable Minister for Family.
Mr. Speaker, actions actually speak louder than words. And when Canadians needed us, and as they continue to need us, we have been there for Canadians. 9 million Canadians at the height of the pandemic accessed CERB. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives actually supported putting CERB out there because we came together as a country. Unfortunately, as we're going through the recovery, the Conservatives have voted against every single measure we have put forward to help Canadians. And let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. On last Thursday, we opened the Canada Dental Benefit. Over 35,000 Canadians have already applied. We're there helping kids, helping Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The news out of Winnipeg is horrific. We know that Indigenous communities across this country are reeling. Indigenous leaders have laid forth a path to save lives in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two Spirits Commission, which calls for specific steps to be taken. Now, every day of inaction means more lives are needlessly lost. Right. So when will this Prime Minister take this genocidal violence against Indigenous women seriously and put in place real action to save lives?
Here, here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for that question, and let me be clear, it is a serious issue in Canada.
Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to go missing and murdered, and that is why our government has invested $2.2 billion to addressing this situation. In fact, in Winnipeg alone, for the Manitoba Indigenous women, 2S LGBTQ, just recently we made an announcement of $8.4 million for those supports. We're going to continue to work forward. We know that there's more work to be done, and we're going to work with the member opposite to make sure we get that done.
The honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has expertise and talent to become a leader in electric vehicle manufacturing. Can the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry update this House on the work our government is doing to secure Canadian jobs and attract important investments in the sector?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague from Brampton Centre for an excellent question, Mr. Speaker. Actually, we attracted a record number of investments. In fact, Bloomberg ranked Canada second in the world now for its battery ecosystem. And more recently, Mr. Speaker, while I was in Germany, we signed a renewed MOU with Volkswagen at a time where they said that they were considering Canada for their first battery cell manufacturing plant in North America, Mr. Speaker. This is good news for workers. This is good news for our economy. This is good news for Canada, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, last week new charges were laid in the murders of 4 more Indigenous women. Indigenous women and girls are 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing than other women and girls across the country. This is an ongoing genocide, and we need urgent action from all levels of government to keep Indigenous women safe. Will the minister commit to doing what the member for Winnipeg Centre and other Indigenous leaders have called for, providing immediate funds and resources to end this cycle of violence?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank the member opposite for that question, and it's a serious question. I want to get to it, but I also want to acknowledge all of the Chiefs, Proxy, and First Nations community members that I've seen in the galleries that are attending the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly. We appreciate your advocacy. We know these are serious issues. You have a partner in our government, and we will make sure that while the progress is slow, that we're going to make sure that $2.2 billion goes to support Indigenous women across this country so that they can feel safe as just every other person in this country.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Terrebonne is rising on a point of order.